From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Ahead today, K-State's Scott Beyer will discuss the potential opportunities for agricultural producers in Kansas that proposed poultry processing plant in northeast Kansas would offer should that plant gain approval. He says that contract poultry production could augment one's current crop and livestock production in an economically favorable way. Then K-State's Vincent Amanor-Boadu will look at the impact of Hurricanes Harvey and Irma on agricultural production in the impacted areas and the possible ripple effect for the agricultural sector in general. And K-State's Charlie Lee talks about the less restricted opportunities to hunt Eurasian Collared Doves in Kansas. All this and more coming up on Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State research and extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social-economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Well, several days back now, an announcement was made that a major meat processor intends to construct a $320 million poultry production and processing plant in northeast Kansas near the community of Tonganoxie in Leavenworth County. There was quite some fanfare with this announcement, revolving around the potential economic influx this would bring to the economy in northeast Kansas and beyond, agriculturally and otherwise. Now, this is a proposed poultry operation by Tyson Foods. It is by no means a done deal, as events over the last day have depicted. We'll talk about that more during the agricultural news segment. However, should that plant become reality, what opportunities would it present for agricultural producers in Kansas? We want to go ahead and explore that right here with our guest, Scott Beyer. He is a poultry specialist with K-State Research and Extension. And Scott, should this Tyson Poultry Complex indeed be approved and come online sometime in 2019, as they're outlining it now, as agribusiness development goes, this would be a big deal.
Yes, it's a really big complex. It's a typical complex. When they expand in poultry production, normally they build what we call a complex, and that includes a hatchery, production facilities, processing facilities, and a feed mill.
As you view this, what was the attraction to northeast Kansas? What resources drew this proposed plant in?
Well, you need a lot of things to make a big project like this go, and all of the needs in this case, Kansas has. We have space. We have some willing folks who would like to, work on the economic side in the form of contract production. The biggest need, of course, is going to be feed. And feed processing, that's huge. You have to have rail lines and infrastructure like that. You've got to have people willing to partner with you to utilize some of the byproducts you'll produce, like in this case, meal being used for other animal feeds, and also fertilizer being used to, for row crops and things like that.
We have seen in Kansas experiences with contract poultry production in the past, in southeast Kansas in particular, with turkey production. Is this opportunity likened to what went previously? Do you see similarities there?
Yeah, it's very similar. We have, like you said, down in southeast Kansas, we have some contract turkey production. It's been there since I've been at Kansas for 20-something years, been pretty successful. Turkey companies are different from broiler companies or chicken companies. Most companies don't produce, they either produce eggs or they produce broiler meat or they produce turkeys. And so they're different companies. But in this case, these are broilers. These are grown short-term for about 6 or 7 weeks in a production facility. There'll be a lot of houses put up as part of this project. So it'll be very similar to that, except we get all the economic benefit as well. Right. We get the feed mill cranking out tons of feed. We get a hatchery that's going to be state-of-the-art hatchery that's going to have some great jobs in it. We will have a processing facility that will employ some folks from one scale to the other. And then the byproducts coming out of those plants as well go right back into our great ag industries we have here. So, as far as sustainability, wow, it uses what we produce and then it we use the products that are left over from it. So it's really going to fit in well to what we do.
To the prospect of contracting with a major meat processor, as Tyson is, and what individuals can do to be part of that system, do you see this as something that could be an entry-level prospect or opportunity for landowners, producers out there?
Absolutely. That's been the interesting part of this and the fun part of this. I have gotten dozens of calls, appointments in my office, people coming by. It's an opportunity. Right now we're struggling getting young people involved in farming and ranching. It's a capital-intense enterprise, and young people are coming out looking at how can I get into that rural area and make a good, decent living for my family and still live in a small town. And, the contracting side with bird production it's unique. It allows you to stay on the farm. It allows you to make an income from growing birds. There's another income that's a side stream, and that's the utilization of litter that comes out of the facilities. So it integrates on your own farm if you want to do row crops, if you want to do litter spreading. There's all kind of things you can do to be a part of that as well. So, what we hope are young people are able to come in and get a little loan and start on the contracting side. And Eric, what's surprising, the look on everybody's face when I tell them I consider poultry production to be a part-time job. I'm not saying there's not days where it's a full-time job. There's a lot to do on the farm, but I consider it to be a part-time job because it is wholly automated, and that gives you time to go out and do something else. And what people don't realize is 80% of the growers, and we have 6,000 or 8,000 in this country, 80% of these contract growers run cattle. Almost 80% of those also run row crops, and it's because they can integrate production. They have a steady stream of income from the contract. They have byproducts they can use on the other side. And they can, through 3 legs of their own stool, can put together a farm or a ranch and get young people involved again. So that's the exciting side of it.
So this could be a vehicle for diversification of an existing operation.
Oh, absolutely. It's the smaller farms that have struggled. How do you get capital to either get bigger, or how do you stay on the farm without having to go off farm and find something else to cover? This is going to be that way of staying on the farm, and and still anywhere from running cattle to planting, any crop you can think of. It's all going to work together in one farm.
On that point, how important is proximity to the plant location, that is Northeast Kansas, or is it important?
Well, I'll tell you, yes, it's important because transportation costs. There'll be feed going back and forth. There'll be birds going back and forth, baby chicks, all that kind of stuff. So transportation is important. And I'll tell you, here they're going to open up that circle a little bit more, because we have wide open spaces and we have straight roads. And, I was surprised if you look at some other places where birds are grown and there's winding little hills and trees where you can't see. And in this case, we'll be able to, they've got a great transportation plan and they have a great streamlined area. Well, they're going to be able to go out further. And so rather than 1 or 2 counties, we're looking at 3 and 4 counties, 5 counties perhaps, that can have an opportunity to contract and spread these guys out. Some, that'll help too. And the opportunity is going to go in a larger grower area than I had anticipated.
And as far as existing commodity availability in Kansas, it would seem one of the, as you said, big winners would be the grain sector, because this kind of plant and the contracting that will be involved in it, off-site, on-site, will absorb quite a bit of feed grains.
Yes, it will. But, like in this case, the feed mill is going to be located on a line where a lot of feed ingredients go through. Because it's not just beans, it's not just corn. There's a lot of byproducts used. There's DDGS that are used in rations now. And so that rail line and having that supply where that feed is and grain is already going out for export, or it's going into other states, they're just kind of going to be sitting there being able to take advantage of that. So that's what it is. So yes, there's local grain prices are. You can sell to the local mill and go that route, or they'll be able to pick it up off a rail line for sure.
Well, what does this development mean for an outreach opportunity for extension at K-State and your poultry program, Scott?
Well, it's a lot of work. That's what we're here for, and I'm excited because I get to work with a farm that's got a lot of outlook. There'll be somebody getting a new contract or bringing something new to their farm or a new family, and they're going to be starting from the ground up. And so knowing what I've known and learning all the mistakes that the industry has had, and all industries have mistakes, learning how to correct those and doing them right from the very beginning, that's exciting. For example, we have manure management plans in place. And then the industry is going to start. Most of these places across the country, we had the industry, and then we developed manure management plans. And sometimes the data didn't match up very well. This time we're going the right way, and so we can, we'll be doing taking soil samples, we'll be doing crop analysis, and looking at how much we can spread and how much money we can save, and making sure we do the right thing for the environment. In this case, we're going to get litter. Nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, plus all the micro ingredients. It's no different than buying chemical fertilizer. You analyze it, you spread it, you base it on your crop needs, you watch your management plan to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So that's the exciting part. That's good old-fashioned extension. And it's going to be a lot of work, but because somebody else is going to be able to benefit in agriculture, that's what I'm excited about.
So it's clear you'll avail yourself to anybody out there that wants to discuss any aspect of participating in this poultry production system.
Absolutely. And the one thing I can tell you is that, our job is definitely to provide the facts. In any project like this, there are going to be some great things. I mean, that's why you work toward them. On any project, there are going to be some things that are more difficult to accomplish. And we need to go out and provide the information. And so you can't just tell them one side of the story. You've got to provide the data on both sides of the story. And I think that's where we fit in an extension.
So we'll have conversations in the not-too-distant future on these matters, Scott. Thank you for coming over. We appreciate your input. Scott Beyer, Research and Extension Poultry Specialist here at Kansas State University. We'll return with more here on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Continuing on now, we're all aware of the broad devastation left in the wake of the two hurricanes that struck first Texas, in the case of Hurricane Harvey, and then Florida and parts of the southeast with Hurricane Irma. The damage assessment, the cleanup, the rebuilding will be over many months and even years. The overtones of these events on agriculture was the subject of a recent conversation between the K-State Radio Network's Jeff Wickman and a K-State agricultural economist, whom you've heard from many times on this broadcast, Vincent Amanor-Boadu.
Vincent, one of the things that always happens after a natural disaster such as Hurricanes Irma and Harvey, people start talking about what the impact is not only on the overall economy, but really from an agricultural standpoint. And there is an impact, especially in the Texas, Florida areas right now, but that impact really spreads nationwide.
Yeah. Jeff, you can think about it this way. You can think about it as dropping a pebble in a pond and watching the ripples go out. So a hurricane like Harvey or Irma will hit Florida or hit Texas, and the residents in those areas will immediately feel the pain. But when those states have significant contribution to certain commodities that the nation consumes as a whole. So you take Texas, for example. Texas is a major location for our refineries. And the Houston area alone, accounted for a huge chunk of our refinery capacity. So with Harvey coming in, we found that for safety, flooding, all those issues with refineries shutting down, capacity went down to as low as 30% in the immediate aftermath. That has an immediate impact, not just for the people who are there, but over time, the ripples reaching the outer bounds of the rest of the country.
I think I saw someplace where they were really somewhat concerned about the cotton crop. There may be some problems along those lines.
That's right. Unfortunately and those are what we call the industrial crops that consumers don't actually think about because, your tomatoes, your apples, your orange juice, those you take every morning. But we don't think about those commercial crops. And those industrial crops have an immediate direct impact on those producers in a way that consumers don't usually feel it. Primarily because, we don't buy clothes every day. And most of the time, by the time it goes through the ginning, the spinning, the cutting, the making, the component of that cotton in that cloth is very small. And so you don't really feel it as much. But for that producer whose crop has just been messed up, it's a direct hit.
And that was several states, wasn't it? Alabama, Georgia,
right.
South Carolina.
South Carolina, yeah. And for those guys, the other thing that we got to think about is for the communities in which they live. Because with lost income, it means their expenses in their communities are also going to be down. And so the ripple effect of these things for local businesses, it becomes real because it's not just the farmer, it's also the dealers they're buying stuff from, the restaurants they can't afford to go to, and all that stuff.
I haven't heard a lot of discussion about the livestock side. Were there some losses in those areas as well?
Yes, I haven't seen. Florida is not a big livestock state, so but Texas was, and there were actually some young men who were using helicopter to try and save some cattle that had been stranded, which was quite innovative, because what they were doing was using the blades on the helicopter to move the water so that those cattle can get to higher ground. And Texas is a large cattle state. The savior for us on that side is where it hit. I mean, if it had hit anywhere a little to the east of Houston, we would have been talking a different thing about livestock prices.
There's always the negative that comes with this, but you also were telling me that there are some positives that come from this economically. Right.
And it's very hard to look at it and use the language that it is positive. I mean, all we can say is, borrow from the lines of hope and say there's always a silver lining in everything that happens. Sometimes, we have industries or companies that need to rebuild. And so in this situation, there's going to be jobs on the other side. Where, flooding and tearing down of buildings that are completely demolished and all that, we now have to rebuild. So the building industry, get the jobs to come and do this. It also allows cities and communities to start rethinking how they reorganize their communities and put things in differently. So on that side, I think what we learned from Andrews, for example, was that all the places that were built after Hurricane Andrew were stronger and were able to withstand Irma. And so we learn from these things, and then we use them to prepare us for bigger disasters later on in our lives.
The construction industry, I guess, is the one we think as being the biggest benefactor. Are there other industries that would, I guess, not really profit from this, but would at least see an increase in business?
Well, anything that is related to construction. And, so you can think about the wood industry, you can think about the appliance industry, you can think, so any of the major housing-related activities in agriculture, for example, we can think about retiling. If you get huge floods and some of these wash things away, we got to rebuild those. So equipment suppliers, accessory suppliers, all those guys become very important players in repositioning us so that we can take advantage of market conditions that emerge after these disasters.
From a land standpoint, is the land changed enough that it could harm or help the agricultural land?
Well, we have to wait for the scientists to do, their work. When you have wind speeds like we had with Irma, it's bringing a lot of, seawater into areas where you don't traditionally have that. And that can change, the edaphic factors of the soil. And so we don't know yet. I mean, a lot of work is still being done to try and capture. So the scientists are going to measure, whether the soils are still good to plant certain crops based on what happened. But we'll figure that out.
As you mentioned, this is going to be a long-term process, and we do learn through that process.
Yes, we do. And it takes a couple of days for these disasters to hit. And it takes decades for us to get back to where we were. And the hope is that when we get back to where we were, we will be in a better place so that we can handle future ones better. Nature is still in charge. And, I'm watching the models of where these storms are going and where they're passing. And they are models. And models are nothing but abstraction from reality. We are using historical information, wind speed, temperature, water pressure, all that stuff to say we think it's going to go in this way. And that is the beauty of science. Science is always uncertain. We never know for sure. And it's that uncertainty that makes it science. But it's also that uncertainty that makes it challenging. So we are going to continue to learn from what has happened. And hopefully it will seep into policy. It will seep into individual behavior to figure out how do we take advantage of the knowledge from what has happened to protect ourselves. Sometimes, and we have to recognize this, sometimes people are just not able to do it, even though they know. And this is where we have to think about how do we structure our policy environment so that we can ensure that a community is a community. Or we decide that we want to change the way the community is and make policies to achieve those objectives.
And we know that from living in Kansas, there's nothing you can do to stop a tornado, just like there's nothing you can do to stop a hurricane.
That's right. When I was moving to Kansas, my realtor said, the good thing about Kansas is that we get tornadoes and not hurricanes. So, we can look at it in that way. But as you said, those are all natural disasters that happen. And what we have to do as a people is constantly to take advantage of where the science has brought us. Today we can, weeks ahead, track these things. Let's go back, 50, 60 years where we didn't have the technology to do that and the amount of lives that were lost and all that. So I think we are in a better place and we are getting better in our communication, in our modeling, in our ability to get things right because we have better technology to allow us to do those. And in doing that, hopefully we also minimize the losses that occur. We saw just in a couple of weeks between Harvey and Irma, the human suffering that occurred are very different. At the scale, at the state level scale, because of just how, the lessons from Harvey influenced the way political leaders communicated about Irma, and hopefully, we'll continue to learn as we move forward.
Those remarks from K-State agricultural economist Vincent Amanor-Boadu, talking with the K-State Radio Network's Jeff Wickman about the agricultural repercussions from Hurricanes Harvey and Irma. After this break, we'll be back with the agricultural news headlines of the day and much more here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Welcome back. Eric Atkinson here as we move on to today's agricultural news headlines. In brief now, we'll begin with the weekly Kansas Crop Progress and Condition Report from the USDA for the week ending this past Sunday. Topsoil moisture supplies have dwindled considerably. Now 1% surplus, 41% adequate, and 58% short to very short around the state. Subsoil moisture is at 1% surplus, 48% adequate, and 51% short to very short. Winter wheat planting in Kansas, 7% complete now. The condition of the corn crop, 55% good to excellent, 28% fair, 17% poor to very poor. Corn in the dent now at 91%, mature 61%, and the corn harvest is 19% complete. Soybean crop condition, 45% good to excellent, 37% fair, 18% poor to very poor. Soybeans dropping leaves at 38%, and the soybean harvest is 1% complete. Grain sorghum condition, 59% good to excellent and 32% fair, 9% poor to very poor. Sorghum coloring now 81%, sorghum reaching maturity 21%, and the sorghum harvest in Kansas is 2% complete. And the fourth cutting of alfalfa in Kansas, 81% complete now. For the national update on corn and soybean conditions, we turn now to the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says soybeans made better progress than corn this week.
We did see soybeans dropping leaves almost doubling during the week from 22 to 41%. Still just slightly behind the 5-year average of 43% and last year's 43%.
He says 9 of the 18 major soybean-producing states saw significant increases in dropping leaves.
And that was led by North Dakota, a 27-point increase in soybeans dropping leaves during the week, followed by Nebraska at 26% and Minnesota and Iowa 23% each.
The first look at harvest numbers show 4% of soybeans harvested nationwide.
Soybean condition, like corn, almost locked into place. We did see a 1-point drop in the good to excellent ratings from 60 to 59%. No change in the very poor to poor number at 12%.
The ratings are behind last year at this time, when 73% of soybeans were rated good to excellent and only 7% were considered very poor to poor. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
As reported by the Topeka Capital Journal, a move by Tyson Foods to build that $320 million packing plant near Tonganoxie may be in trouble. After Leavenworth County commissioners backed off their support for the facility, the proposed Tyson plant sparked an uproar in Tonganoxie, prompted creation of a grassroots group called Citizens Against Project Sunset. Drawn to the area by state and local government tax breaks and incentives was the project. However, it may now face trouble if members of the Leavenworth County Commission withdraw their support. Commissioners voted 2-1 yesterday to rescind a resolution of intent that pledged $500 million in revenue bonds for the facility, calling into question the future of the project. Tyson's senior manager of public relations, Worth Sparkman, said in an email that the company was disappointed by the commission's reversal on those revenue bonds. It's unclear, though, whether the commission will hold its opposition to Tyson. Commissioner Clyde Graber, who voted against Tyson yesterday, announced he would step down from the commission, that is, for health reasons. Hundreds of area residents turned out last Friday for a rally against the project, sharing their concerns with state lawmakers who attended. The facility would sit on 300 acres south of Tonganoxie near I-70, and its poultry grow houses would be spread across a 50-mile radius from the plant. It could process as many as 1.2 million chickens each week. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and now it's on to this weekly feature for you dairy producers from the Animal Sciences and Industry Department at K-State called Milk Lines. Here's K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk. Mike?
Today I want to talk with our Kansas dairy producers concerning the last cutting of alfalfa this fall. As we roll into fall, one of the things we need to consider is when are we going to take that last cutting, and we need to be thinking about what's going to happen next year with that stand of alfalfa as well and trying to get it over the winter. So what are some things we need to consider? Well, first, fertilization is really important. When we think about surviving cold stress and helping the plant do a better job of getting through the winter, we need to think about the potassium level in the soil. So if you haven't soil tested recently, like in the last couple of years, you might want to review those numbers, and if it's been longer than that, you may need to grab a quick soil sample just to see where you're at on potassium level, and you still got some time to do some fall fertilization. Keep in mind that fall fertilization needs to occur with enough time so that some of that potassium can be taken down into the soil by rainfall and then incorporated into the plants. If it's not incorporated actually into the plants, in other words, plants have to take it up before it's actually going to help them survive the winter. If you're in an intensive cut system, you might really want to think about paying attention to this, because in an intensive cut system, and generally we would be talking about taking cuttings of alfalfa every 28 days or less. In those systems, we put a little more stress on the plant, so maybe it becomes a little more important in these realms. As you look at that fall harvest and trying to decide whether or not you're going to take it, a lot of times we're disappointed by the yield that we get. We look at the field and we think, well, that should really turn out a fairly nice yield here late in the year. However, keep in mind that the leaflets are generally larger in the fall due to the growing conditions, so it really makes it look like there's a lot more material out there than what there really is. So when we look at late season harvest, we need to think about how that might impact the harvest of the first cutting of the next year. Generally, late season harvest will actually reduce your first harvest next year. So some of the things to consider in making that decision: first of all, the first 6 inches of growth you see out there in the fall is actually mostly from root reserves. So if you just have 6 inches out there, then that means that we've probably got most of the regrowth out of the root reserves, and we need to allow those plants to continue to grow to actually put some material back down and reserves into the root. So how long does that take? Well, some people feel it may take as long as 45 days to adequately rest that stand before you get the killing frost. And of course, that's always hard to predict when that killing frost is going to take place. So if you're in a very intensive cutting system, you may want to add several days to your normal cutting interval and try to give that alfalfa at least 40 to 45 days rest before that frost hits. The other thing to think about as you cut that last cutting is you might want to cut it a little higher than normal, leaving at least 6 inches of stubble out there to catch snow. Another good practice is to leave strips throughout the field that are uncut that will also help in catching snow, which will also help your alfalfa stand survive the winter. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging you to think about your fall harvest of alfalfa.
Thanks, Mike. This is Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
We're back now on this Agriculture Today, and in the guest chair once again, Charlie Lee, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. We're familiar with the native doves we find in Kansas, like mourning doves. There is another dove species that is found here as well. It may be lesser known. It's called the Eurasian Collared Dove, and Charlie, with dove hunting season underway, it's worthwhile folks know about this.
Many hunters actively seek mourning doves as well as white-winged doves in some locations of Kansas. It's difficult to predict when the mourning dove migration begins, but sometimes mourning dove hunting is a fairly short season here in Kansas. The mourning dove's migration is kind of a complicated affair. It's related to the bird's age and sex, but they move south, and usually with the young first, then the females, and finally the males. But what that results in is people that were having good populations of mourning doves now not finding any. But with the Eurasian collared dove, which is non-migratory, hunters do not need to be that concerned. Find a population of Eurasian collared doves. The season is year-round for exotic doves, which are Eurasian collared doves and ringed turtle doves. There is no daily bag limit or no possession limit, and you can still participate in dove hunting.
So distinguishing the Eurasian collared dove is relatively easy vis-a-vis a mourning dove?
Well, there's Certainly some similarities, but they are fairly easy to tell apart, particularly if you see them close together. The collared doves are the doves that have a black collar with no marks on the wings. They have a squared-off tail. Mourning doves have a black spot on their cheek and then on the upper side of the wings. Feral pigeons, they come in all different colors, but they have a white patch on the upper cheek and a dark bill. It's interesting that the Eurasian collared dove has done so well as a newcomer here into the United States.
It's an invasive species, you say?
It's certainly an invasive species. It was originally from Asia and Europe. They've become more invasive in the past century. They completely invaded Western Europe by the 50s. They showed up in the Bahamas by 1970. And now are found all the way north into Canada and Alaska border. It was thought there in 1974 that about 50 Eurasian collared doves escaped from captivity in the Bahamas, then were blown during a hurricane to Florida, and now are found in almost every state in the U.S. as well as Mexico. So they've very quickly occupied existing habitat in the United States and seem to have at least somewhat slowed down in their population growth here recently.
Speaking of habitat, though, they're obviously quite adaptive, but do they prefer particular parts of the ecosystem?
Well, they live in urban, suburban areas throughout much of the U.S. In rural areas, you look for them farms, livestock areas where grain is available. They are a seed-eating bird, just like mourning doves. Found in similar type habitats, but much more urban, suburban area than mourning doves. They do nest above the ground, where mourning doves will nest either in trees or on the ground. So they have some similar characteristics. Still lay 1 to 2 eggs, but they can have multiple broods through this growing season, with as many as 6 broods being described. They make a very sparse nest, with the male dove bringing the female's twigs, grasses, roots, and other things to make the nest out of. And sometimes the male actually will push those nesting materials right under the female.
Do they bring any negative impacts to bear on the more native dove species like the mourning dove, like the white-winged dove?
Well, they are a little more aggressive. The Eurasian collared doves will chase off mourning doves. We're not really sure on the spread of disease because that's not been documented, but they're known carriers of a couple of very common diseases in mourning doves, and probably will be carriers of diseases that might affect domestic poultry. So they can be a threat not only to our native biodiversity, but also a possible economic threat. I think we have more significant diseases like avian influenza to worry about than some of these diseases that may be carried by doves. It's a potential threat, but not yet documented.
If one's interested then in, specifically pursuing Eurasian collared doves in the hunt, what would be some tips to follow? Basically the same as you would for a mourning dove, a turtle dove?
Well, I think most of those hunters that are pursuing Eurasian collared doves typically find them in a flight pattern where they're leaving feeding fields and going to water in the early evening. That's a very similar technique that they use on mourning doves, and seems to be a fairly effective way to take Eurasian collared doves. They can be hunted similar to mourning doves on feeding fields. I know some folks that shoot them on corn, either taken early as harvested for wet corn, or even in some cases they're found feeding in waste grain in cornfields that have been cut for ensilage.
But once again, as regulations have it, no daily bag limit, no possession limit, and the hunt is allowed year-round. So the opportunity is there.
Certainly a lot of opportunity, and I would encourage people to take that opportunity when their mourning dove hunts start to decline.
Once more, there's some background on the Eurasian collared dove, found commonly here in Kansas and many other places across this country. Charlie, thanks for talking about it with us today. That's Research and Extension Wildlife Specialist at K-State, Charlie Lee. So goes our Tuesday edition. We'd remind you once again, if you'd like to hear a full podcast of each day's program, we post those on our website for your listening. That is at ksre.ksu.edu/news. Click on the Radio Network tab there, and then the Agriculture Today link. That's also where you'll find the link to our broadcast streamed every day at this time, if you happen to be out of earshot of this affiliate on any given occasion. Again, access all that at ksre.ksu.edu/news. On tomorrow's broadcast, we plan to visit with K-State's Romolo Lulato about a host of winter wheat planting time considerations. So please be back with us for that and more right here tomorrow. Meantime, Eric Atkinson, thanking you for joining us for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.